Okay, everyone, it's now 10:02. I thank you all for being here. Happy New Year. I'm sure many of us, this is our first meeting of the year, and I think it's going to be an important one. So what we have done is we have this, we're recording this webinar so that anyone can get a copy of it. We'll send it out after we're done. So if you want to revisit anything, we are going to be taking questions, of course. So I ask that you use the chat function, and at the end we'll go through all those questions. We have some pretty cool features that we've opened up. I'm going to explain in a second or so on this slide, where you can ask any kind of COVID or HR question, and we'll do all the research as a courtesy for you being on the phone. So I'm sure many of you have a lot of detailed, specific questions about your business and how to handle things, whether it's COVID or anything else. That'll be open for the next hour. We'll go through that, and I'll show you how to access that. So with that said, again, I hope you had a great new year. Hope you're all rested, ready to get back into 2022. Certainly it sounds like, or feels like, it's going to be an interesting year. So let's jump in, and welcome to our webinar today. Before we dive in, let me introduce myself. My name is Rick Marr. I'm the CEO and owner of Turning Point Human Capital Management. Our company assists business with their HR and technology needs, HR technology. So we have experts on staff that are available to run your entire HR department, or just be a resource for immediate and important questions you may have. So we're extremely well versed in all things HR, especially when it comes to what's happening right now, and the big questions such as vaccine mandates that we're going to discuss in detail, OSHA, employees leaving, employees having COVID, employees who can't get tests, and the list goes on, and we'll talk about these things in detail today. Obviously, this whole thing that's going on right now is a fluid situation, so we're monitoring all the moving parts in real time. So what I would say is, literally, there's new information coming out day to day, whether it's New York City or New York State or other states. We have folks on this webinar from across the country. So we're going to focus today specifically on the OSHA mandate, and just a little bit on some specific state or city mandates. And it may come as no surprise to all of us that the business world is shifting. Between the economy, the pandemic, we as business owners and business leaders are scared and scrambling to adjust not only our sales and business models, but also our employee operations. An HR issue which is not handled properly could be one of the costliest mishaps that happens to any company. Now, that could be a compliance issue around asking about sickness and health, or hiring and firing properly, or how to track your employees' vaccination status and how to deal with these things. So as I mentioned, we are opening up this is our Ask Live service. And what we want to do is give you free access to this. So, for the next couple of hours, anyone who's on this call, if you have any questions about HR, anything, it could be, how to write a handbook, it could be how to terminate an employee, or it could be something around COVID and the mandates. We really encourage you to use our Ask Live service. And this is something that you would use for very specific questions to you or your business. You need some HR support, and this is what we're going to do today for kind of gratis service for being here. So you go to turningpointhcm.com, and on the homepage, there's a little green button right there. And when you hit that green button, pops up a little text box. Put any information in there that you want, and then we will do all the research, cite the laws, anything that needs to be done, and get back to you within 24 hours with that answer. So I really encourage you, with all the stuff that's going on, if you have a question that's really detailed and specific about your business, we really encourage you to use this service. So you ask a question, you're going to get a response that's in depth with details, and it has useful links and resources such as laws or rules or things that we cite. So let's start talking about what's going on with OSHA and how it affects you directly. Looks like I got a question. Let me just check that out. Okay, that was from Kara. So she put that link in the checks box. So thank you, Kara, for doing that. So let's talk about what's going on with OSHA and how it affects you, right? So I'll be moving through a lot over these next 35 minutes. So please jot down any questions you have, and we'll be taking Q&A at the end, as I mentioned. Our agenda today is to discuss the OSHA Emergency Temporary Standard, or you'll hear it referenced as the ETS. We'll be referencing or talking about vaccine mandates, employee terminations around this, hiring that will have to take place around this, and how to prepare for the next steps that your organization should take, and what are some, I'm going to call it futuristic, and you'll see when we get there, what are some futuristic things businesses are doing to deal with these employee mandate COVID types of issues. So let's jump into the OSHA standards. So many of you have probably heard about this, so let me give you a little detail. On November 4th of 2021, OSHA issued an unpublished version of the long-awaited Emergency Temporary Standard, ETS, as to COVID-19 vaccination or testing requirements, covering most private employers with 100 employees or more in the United States. Now, I will say this, this is purely speculation and opinion on my behalf, so just take it for what it's worth. I believe that this ETS will be coming down to businesses under 100 employees. So to use New York City as an example, New York City has it down to 1 employee, and with the information on the Omnicron, it seems as though there's going to be some more aggressive moves to get more and more people either vaccinated or tested. So that's just my opinion. So when does it go into effect? Originally, it was going to go into effect on January 4th. There have been several court appeals to this case. It started at the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, and it was an order of stay was ordered. The Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals then overturned that. And so as it stands today, there are 2 important things to know. As of January 10th, all employers with 100 employees or more will have to comply with the mandate. However, OSHA is not going to start enforcing penalties, which we will get into, until February 9th. With that said, the United States Supreme Court has expedited their review of this mandate, but no one is sure when that review will be completed, or what's it when a judge gives an order? When an order comes down, whether this mandate is constitutional and can go forward, or it is not constitutional and it goes away. So right now, what we're advising employers to do, and those of you that advise other clients, is to prepare for the emergency temporary standard to go into effect on January 10th. Okay, so just a handful of days away, a week away. The Act also calls for this temporary standard to become permanent within 6 months of its implementation. So the temporary standard is temporary. So the next question is, when will it go away? The Act is written so that it will become a permanent standard within 6 months of its inception. So January 10th, I guess that's June 10th, all right, or July 10th. So within 6 months of its implementation, it will become a permanent standard should it be allowed to move forward. So next slide. So what are the employer's responsibilities? For the purpose of the ETS, a covered employee is one with 100 employers or more at any time during the effective period of the ETS. So any time during the ETS. So if you have 98 and then you go to 105, then that means you're going to be mandated by the ETS. So this means, again, that employees who meet this minimum threshold as of the effective date of the ETS are covered throughout the effective time of the ETS, even if the employer later falls under minimum employee threshold. So whether you're going above or below. For an employee that falls short of the 100 employees as of the effective date, but reaches the threshold at any point that the ETS is in effect, the employer will become subject to the ETS requirements as of the day they meet the threshold and remain covered throughout the remainder of the ETS. So just to kind of think about this, let's say you have 90 employees today, and in 3 months you get to 100, and this now becomes a permanent law. That employer will have to comply with the ETS. So, so who are excluded? The ETS specifies that the requirements apply to only employees who visit employers' indoor locations where other people are present, employees who work exclusively at home or outdoors or at a site where the employee is the only person present, are not required to comply with employers' requirements. So think about that. There's some important things there that this may affect how businesses plan and how your clients operate and how the companies that you represent operate. Companies that are working remotely don't have to do this. So that may come into business planning of how everyone handles this going forward. So for those employers who work at home, outdoors, or a site where they're the only employee, if later on that employee should later be required to visit one of the employer's indoor facilities, then the employee must satisfy the vaccination or testing requirements. So you can see this is a fluid law, right? Reasonable accommodations and exceptions to the policy. This is always something that people are asking about. What about various reasonable accommodations? The ETS requires employers to provide reasonable accommodations and exceptions for employees for whom the vaccine is medically contraindicated, for whom medical necessity requires a delay in vaccination, or who are entitled to a reasonable accommodation due to a disability or sincerely held religious beliefs, practices, or observances that conflict with the vaccination requirement. As to the vaccination requirements, the employer is required to provide an employee with time to obtain and recover from the vaccination. We're going to go through that in a little bit, what those times are. Specifically, the employer must provide up to 4 hours of paid time, inclusive of travel time, at the employee's regular pay rate to obtain the vaccine. And the employer must also provide reasonable paid time off to recover from any side effects of each dose of the vaccine. So, you can imagine that's going to add a burden to HR departments, right? Tracking, all that sort of stuff. Specifically now, if there's requirements of additional booster shots, et cetera. So that should, there'll be multiple of them through the year as kind of the news is reporting. And to the reasonable exceptions, there's been many stories about companies, institutions like the U.S. military that are denying those, or they're reviewing them and finding that there's no standing for reasonable accommodation. So I think companies will be scrutinizing those reasonable accommodations. So you really need to understand how to work within reasonable accommodations and how to plan for those. So the next is the proof of vaccination and record keeping requirements. The employer, and I'm still on the same slide of employer responsibility. The employer must obtain. Can you all hear me? Yep, I think I cut out. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Just checking, Kara. Okay, I'm back. Okay, good. Sorry, so I'm still on the slide, employer responsibility. So the employer's responsibility is to obtain valid records for all employees' vaccination by obtaining one of the following: a record of immunization from a healthcare provider or pharmacy, a copy of the COVID-19 vaccination record card, a copy of medical records documenting vaccination, a copy of immunizations from a public health, state, or tribal immunization information system, right? And a copy or any other official documentation that contains the type of vaccine, the date of the vaccine, the name of the healthcare professional or clinic that administered it. And if an employee is unable to produce acceptable proof of vaccine, they may provide a signed, dated employee statement, right? That A, attests to the vaccination status, full or partial, B, attest that the employee has lost or otherwise unable to produce proof of vaccination. And C, includes the following language: I declare, certify, or verify, or state that this statement about my vaccination status is true and accurate. I understand that knowingly providing false information regarding my vaccination status on this form may subject me to criminal penalties. Okay, so just think of this. This is going to put a lot of pressure on HR departments, right? Making sure that the documentation is acceptable, is complete, and all those sorts of things. So the ETS specifically requires employers to obtain and maintain these records, as well as a roster of all employees' vaccination status. These records and roster are considered employee medical records and must be kept confidential while the ETS is in effect. Remember, the ETS is in effect, but it's expected to go permanent within 6 months. The HR department or the company is now required to keep medical records on this, so additional burden on that department. But the records are not subject to lengthy retention requirements under the law. So they haven't defined that yet, but so let's assume record keeping will be a very important component of the employer's responsibility, the HR team's responsibility, and making sure. So for testing requirements, for employers that allow a testing option, right? So you can have a testing option if for those that are not vaccinated. The employer must ensure that unvaccinated employees who report to work at least once every 7 days are tested for COVID-19 at least once every 7 days, and provide documentation of the most recent COVID-19 test result no later than the 7th day following the date on which the employee last provided a test result. So basically, the employee must get tested and show proof of that every week. For employers that allow, the employers are not required to pay for the cost of testing for the employees who choose that option. Just that's an important thing. For employers that allow a testing option, the employer must ensure that unvaccinated employees who report to work at least once every 7 days are tested and provide that documentation as mentioned, and that those employees who are not fully vaccinated are required to wear face coverings while in the workplace that meet the standards provided in the ETS, unless doing so would place that employee at a greater risk. So if there's some reason that wearing a mask puts an employer at a greater risk, then could be an exception. So the circumstance when employees are subject to this requirement that may temporarily remove their face covering, they may remove their face covering when eating or in an enclosed office space alone. So you can see there's a lot of nuance to this, and there's a lot of responsibilities that are going to be on HR departments. Also, the ETS requires that employers allow any employee who wishes to wear a face covering to do so. So you can't prohibit a vaccinated employee from wearing a face covering. Finally, should an employee wish, the employee may wear a respirator. So one of those, masks that you see. With they have filters on them, etc. You may allow them to wear a respirator rather than a face covering. So the next part of this and final part of the employer responsibility are notices to employees. So this is important. Employers are required to provide employees with information detailing the requirements of the ETS. So much like a handbook, there's responsibility for the employer to notify the employees of what the ETS is, as well as any employer policies or procedures established to comply with this section. So you may have company may have additional rules and regulations that they want to follow. This information must be provided in a language and at a literacy level the employee can understand, right? So a language and literacy level, now it's adding more burden to the HR departments. The information, in addition, the employer must provide employees with information about COVID-19 vaccine efficacy, right? So this is not to talk about this, but we're seeing different levels of what the efficacy is. It seems to be changing. Do we need a booster? Is it 3 months? Is it 6 months? So it's constantly changing. That HR department is going to have to continue to monitor these things. So employers are also required to inform employees about the requirements of the law, which prohibits employers from discharging or discriminating against employees for reporting a work-related injury or illness. So if an employee reports that they've been injured or ill because of this mandate, it is illegal for employers to discriminate against that employee for any reason. So with that said, let's talk about where we are, right? And as of December 17th of 2021, when the Sixth Court Circuit of Appeals overturned the stay by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, that's a mouthful, this law or this mandate is now going into effect again as of January 10th. The mandate starts. And however, the OSHA will not start issuing fines until February 9th. So you have about a month to comply with the law, or the mandate rather, I'm sorry, before fines start to be handed out. Here's a list of some of those fines. Certainly they are serious. There are some additional laws that are not yet passed, but if those last two bullet points, that's the Build Back Better law, which although was defeated in 2021 or not brought up for a vote, the rumors are, or the stories are, that it will be brought up for a vote this month. And the Build Back Better law has some significant fines. So those last two. So if there are some serious violations, not sure what a serious violation is, I think that's still yet to be defined. A business can have up to a $70,000 fine. And for those that are willfully or repeated violators of the mandate, up to $700,000 in fines. So as you can see here, there's significant opportunity to make a mistake and give some agency your hard-earned money. So having a good resource, having a good plan in place, and being prepared for this mandate is extremely important for your business. So I just want to touch quickly on what the employers are, the paid time off responsibilities are for those that get vaccinated, boosters, etc. So paid time off must be provided to support employee vaccinations. Up to 4 hours paid time for each vaccination dose. So someone's going to need to track those hours and those times, right? So if people are getting 2 vaccination shots plus multiple boosters, right, you want to make sure you're tracking that. And with additional required time that's unpaid but protected for reasonable, if someone needs more time after their shots, you have to give them more than 4 hours, but it would be unpaid. However, if they have symptoms or side effects as a result of their vaccination or booster, reasonable paid time off to recover from any symptoms or side effects resulting from the vaccination. So if you send someone to get, or someone goes to get their vaccination booster, they get 4 hours of paid time off. Maybe it takes them longer, so they need 6 hours. So those other 2 hours would be protected but not paid. However, the next day they have an adverse side effect from that inoculation, and they need reasonable paid time off. There's no definition of what reasonable is yet at this point in time. Anecdotally, we've heard, a couple of days to no different than having the disease itself. So that's going to have to be monitored or understood. And at this point, there's not specific guidance around that. So that is an important thing to know. So let's go on. So, where are we, right? So what are companies doing to be either proactive or reactive, right? So the first thing to be proactive is record keeping. This will be a big lift for employers to keep track of who is vaccinated, when are they vaccinated, when they will have to have a booster shot. Think about the time off that we just talked about, the paid time off. Do they need reasonable time off to recover from adverse effects? When employees vaccinated one day and on the next day, will they fall out of compliance, and how will this be handled? So for instance, if someone has their 2 shots or Johnson and Johnson shot, and they had it in August, when they don't have when are they required to get a booster shot, and when do they fall out of compliance, and who is tracking that, right? So this is a big open question that a lot of people have, but all in all, what it's going to add to the record keeping is employers, HR departments are going to be taxed further. So make sure you have a good resource, right? The next thing is testing. So this is anecdotal. I'm sure many of you have sensed this or felt this or know of someone who's dealt with this. This is from my personal experience just this past weekend. Anyone who needs to be tested, the lines at the city MDs and the walk-in clinics are astronomically long. So it's difficult to find a test. To make an appointment for a test is also extremely difficult. I live on Long Island. We have to get a test for my son to go back to college. Until we found a test after 8 to 10 hours of searching, we were going to have to drive to Connecticut to get him a test. That's how difficult it is. I reached out to one of our partners. We partner with Heed Healthcare on our testing and tracking with our clients. We use Heed Healthcare as our partner on that. And Heed Healthcare is referencing significant supply chains in finding tests. Now they're testing thousands and thousands of people each week, employees. So it's going to be a very difficult thing to find testing. So being proactive and having a supply on hand is going to be very important for anyone who needs testing, right? HIPAA training, right? As you can imagine, think of all the things we talked about in the medical space here. So this is creating a lot of discussion around health-related issues. Much like diversity or sexual harassment training, everyone in your organization who is dealing with the employees, vaccine status, health status, testing status, absolutely should have HIPAA training. This could be a tremendous future pitfall if you're not getting those folks trained properly, right? The next thing is turnover. So we talk a lot about the great exodus. Employers should absolutely have a robust recruiting strategy in place. Just imagine, the national stats are that about 60% of the population is vaccinated as of right now. It can go one of two ways. It can go up as these mandates take effect, or it could go down as those that are fully vaccinated do not go and get their booster shot in a timely manner, right? So if we just extrapolate, if 60% of the population, according to some statistics, are vaccinated, then we should expect 40% of our employees could potentially have to be terminated. What does a company do if the employees have to be terminated? How do you deal with that turnover? How do you get a recruiting strategy? How do you run your business? All of these things, proactive companies are thinking about right now, and they're planning for them. So proactive versus reactive is an important thing. And then finally, having a resource that they can ask questions about this matter. So the reason we activated Ask Live was so that you all can sample a resource that we've built just for this purpose for any HR research, because it's going to be important to have a resource, and we want to see that. So what do we see on the horizon? Variants, right? So we're into Omnicron. There could be many things next, right? And employers need to be ready to react and move forward with them. So what does this mean to you? think about the term the Great Exodus, right? This has been thrown around a lot lately, and for good reason. Companies who do not want to enforce a vaccine mandate will likely have to terminate those employees, right? To meet, so companies who will enforce the mandate will have employees who are going to leave on their own accord. So what's going to happen if your most important employees leave? Hiring is going to become first and foremost. So are you compliantly ready to have these difficult conversations? Are you prepared to lose potentially your best employees? Do you have an action plan in place to replace a mass amount of employees at one time? What does your budget look like? Not only for hiring, but if weekly testing is an option. This can get extremely costly. Hiring a new employee can range from 1.25 to 1.4 times the salary of that employee for the year. So these conversations could be extremely difficult. So as a CEO or leader or management team, it's important to be sure that all of your policies are in place that apply to your company. Make sure your handbook is up to date. Have written policies and documentations of all communication. Have an expert on hand in case anything arises. And if you need to terminate employees, ensure that you have a hiring plan in place. So as the difficulty in finding workers might force business owners to turn to alternatives, and we're starting to hear a lot about this as automation, because people are getting locked out of their jobs and businesses have to thrive. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you two quick examples of videos of just some things that are going on in the HR world that are driving businesses, and employees have to be ready for this. This is Flippy. I'm going to let it play for about 30 seconds. So as you can see there, Flippy is going to be replacing one of, an important sector of our business, which is the hotel and restaurants and all that sort of stuff. So typically what was a, entry-level type of job is now potentially being replaced by automation, right? I'm going to show you one more in a second. But the other side of that is this is real. It's already happening. Cali Burger and some other fast food chains are already implementing this technology to deal with employees that have to be terminated, the lack of finding employees, or employees who don't want to do these jobs anymore. So, there's other factors like, rising, minimum wage, et cetera, but that's for a different conversation. So the next one that I want you to think about is, this is Boston Dynamics. So they're using robots now to replace people. And Boston Dynamics, I think you can you can look them up. They have a lot of different things. They have robots that do dances. They can do construction work. So if you think about this, as these employees are dealing with difficult tasks like the electrical grid, they're using robots to replace or deal with the lack of people and keep them safe and all those sorts of things. So I'll stop that. So just to kind of share that with you, businesses are responding to this they're not standing still, and they're not going to not try to succeed, right? So what they're doing is they are moving towards automation. And from futuristic thinking, this is not Skynet, from the Terminator from 1984. This is now here, right? And if you think this mandate is going to go into effect and employees are going to be terminated, it's going to be difficult to find new employees. Not saying every business is going to, dog walking robots or hamburger flipping arms, but the idea of automation is here. Big companies are doing it, and it's going to be coming as a result of all these things that are going on, and it's going to be going there. So I'm just going to get to some questions. I want to thank you for joining us today. We will be continuing to keep you updated on new mandates as they come through. I have right now, I'll open it to questions. So if you want to put in the chat any questions, certainly you can use Ask Liv. If that's somewhere you want to go, if you want to ask a specific question about your business. But if you have a more general question about this topic, the mandate, what is happening, what's expected, all those sorts of things, please use the chat function. So I do have a question right now. So this comes from Mark. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today. So Mark is asking, what do you think will happen long term with OSHA and the mandates? Mark, that's an amazing question. And I'll preface this by saying this is only my opinion, and I kind of referenced this a couple of times earlier in the conversation. My belief is that the mandates are here to stay. The ETS was written with a permanent goal in mind. I think that my feeling is that the Supreme Court is going to allow the mandate to move forward. And my third belief is that that this is going to be moved down from the 100 employee level down to the smallest of small businesses. And the reason I say the smallest of small businesses, because I forget the exact stats, but something like 70% of the population of the workforce works for businesses that are less than 100 employees. So my anticipation is that once they roll it out at the 100 level, they're going to move it down to the the smaller level, just like they did in New York State, in New York City rather. So New York City's mandate is down to 1 employee. If you have 1 employee, you need to test. So looks like we're having we have another question. Are there templates for policies and procedures that can be required? The answer is yes. So it's certainly something that we're doing. It's certainly something we've provided to all of our customers, our clients. We write policies every day. The off-the-shelf policies, I don't know, are necessarily, they're a good starting point, but they do need to be customized, because like buying anything or implementing any off-the-shelf quote unquote legal policy, the suggested language may not be perfect in your situation. So it's highly advisable that you have a resource that could take those types of policies and procedures and then add add some customization to it. We have another question. With mandatory PTO for vaccine and any time needed for adverse reaction, can this be taken from the employee accrued PTO time, or is there a separate mandate for COVID PTO time? That is a great question. So I'm going to ask Kara to put that into Ask Liv so that we can do more specific research on that and get back to you. And she already lives on it, so we're already on it. So we're gonna research that. But I have not read anywhere that it's additional PTO time. I mean, that it's not additional PTO time. The way that I'm reading it is that the PTO time is in addition and specifically for this. So if someone has 20 hours of PTO accrued, the way that I'm reading it is that PTO time is an addition. And the reason I say that is some people do not have PTO time. So if an employer does not offer PTO time, which happens, that employee needs that PTO time to go get their vaccine and needs to, if there's, need to recover from its adverse effects. So that is my initial reaction to that. It's a very good question. And it's a great question for the group because there are so many nuances to this law still, or this mandate, that no one knows all of it. And it seems to be changing every time. And this would be one of those things that I'm not sure has been completely thought through, because the assumption is every employer over 100 employees has PTO time. And that's not necessarily true across the country. So that's a great question. So we'll get back to you on that. But my my initial reaction, and I could be wrong, is that this is in addition to accrued PTO time. So thank you for that question. Then another question, Paula is asking, excuse me, what are current options for monitoring this? It seems it's changing almost weekly. That's absolutely true. So from a monitoring perspective, as you can imagine, we have our monitoring system where we're managing that for our clients as part of our services. It's advisable that you have a resource that understands these things, that's working it for you, that's monitoring the changes of this law. So there are resources out there. As I said, I don't want to sound self-aggrandizing, but certainly we're doing it for all of our clients, and across the country. And there are resources out there, and it's certainly something that we advise you have someone who truly understands, whether it's in-house on your staff or outsourced, that understands what's going on and has the infrastructure to track these things and monitor them as effectively as possible. Do we know if this additional PTO time, is there still tax relief for it? So this is another great question that'll go to Liv, but here I'm going to answer it this way. With the recent infrastructure bill that was passed in, I'm going to say November, the hard asset infrastructure bill that was passed by the Congress, Senate, and signed into law by President Biden, they removed from that bill they ended the retained employee credit. I forget what that was, but there was a credit, a tax credit that employers were getting for meeting certain criteria with their employees. They ended that early. So my gut reaction is that there will be no tax relief for this PTO time. I think it will be considered standard at an expense to the employer. And the only reason I'm saying that, and we'll confirm this in research, the only reason I'm saying that is, as we all know, we've heard the federal government, state governments, city governments have borrowed lots and lots of money these past couple of years to keep things going. I'm going to use it, my instinct guided by experience says they need to get that money, they need to get money back into the coffers. So for that reason, my sense, and we'll confirm this, is that there is not tax relief for the PTO time. I haven't read anything specifically about either side, whether there is or there isn't, but that's just my opinion, and we will get you research on that. So thank you for that question. So if there are no more questions, we're right up on 10:45. I thank you all for being here. We are going to send you a copy of this webinar. It'll be probably take us about 24 hours to get it to you. And we will also send you the research that Liv does on those two questions around PTO time. Those are important questions, and we will distribute a copy to everyone who was on this webinar today. That also will probably be tomorrow. So we thank you for being here. It's wonderful seeing you all, wishing you the best 2022 that there can be, and have a great day. And if we can help, just give us a shout. Take care.